After 40 years, I sold my ranch for retirement. My son and daughter-in-law arrived, demanding the money, saying I'd be dead soon anyway. When I refused, my own son punched me. Twice. I calmly gave them 60 seconds to leave. They underestimated me. Badly. What happened next changed everything. Like and share this story and tell me your city. You won't want to miss a single moment. The sharp, metallic tang of blood filled Alara's mouth, a grotesque counterpoint to the quiet hum of her refrigerator. Her head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat matching the drip of crimson onto the pristine white linoleum of her kitchen floor. At 62, Alara had faced her share of hardships, but never had she imagined her own son would be the one to leave her standing in a pool of her own blood. Ethan, her flesh and blood, stood over her, his face a mask of contorted fury. "You're being selfish, Mom," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the stainless steel appliances. "That ranch money should go to the family. To us." His words were like daggers, each one twisting in the fresh wound he had inflicted. Beside him, her daughter-in-law, Chloe, looked on with a chilling detachment. Chloe, ever impeccably dressed, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her manicure flawless, even as she witnessed such brutality, added her venomous contribution. "Learn to share, Alara. You'll be dead soon anyway. What do you need all that money for?" Her tone was calm, almost casual, making the words even more cutting than Ethan's rage. It was as if she were discussing the weather, not Alara's future or her very existence. Alara barely registered the pain anymore, her mind reeling back decades. 40 years of her life poured into that ranch. She remembered Arthur, her late husband, his strong hands guiding hers as they fixed fences, birthed calves, and tilled the soil under the relentless Texas sun. They had built that life together, brick by brick, dream by dream, sacrificing youthful pleasures for the unforgiving demands of the land. Every early morning, every late night, every blister, every aching muscle, it all had a price. It was their legacy, born of love and grit. "Dad's been dead for 8 years, Mom," Ethan interjected, ripping her back to the horrifying present. He dismissed her memories with a wave of his hand. "Time to let go of the past. It's just a ranch. What's it to you now, anyway?" His words were a crude dismissal of her entire history, a callous disregard for the foundation of her identity. He saw only a transaction, a sum. That sum was precisely $850,000. It wasn't just money to Alara. It was the summation of her life's work, the hard-earned fruit of decades of sweat, tears, and unwavering dedication. It was her security, her dignity, her freedom in her twilight years. She had sold the ranch with a heavy heart, knowing it was the only way to ensure her own comfortable retirement, a promise she and Arthur had made to each other. "The money is for my retirement," Alara said, her voice strained but steady, a testament to a strength forged by years of resilience. "I promised to help you with a down payment on a house, Ethan, when I could. When I had enough to secure my own future first. Not now, not all of it." She had always been generous, always willing to lend a hand, but this was different. This was her very survival. Chloe let out a scoff that grated on Alara's nerves. "You're sitting on almost $1 million while we're living in that tiny apartment, trying to make ends meet." She gestured around Alara's modest, yet comfortable kitchen with a contemptuous flick of her manicured wrist. The implication was clear. Alara was hoarding wealth, deliberately depriving them. The audacity ignited a spark in Alara, a flicker of the fire that had kept her going through blizzards and droughts. "Then perhaps," she retorted, her voice hardening, "you could get a job, Chloe. You're perfectly capable." That was it, the breaking point. Ethan's eyes, already wild with anger, flashed. He lunged forward, grabbing Alara by her shoulders, shaking her violently. The world spun, her vision blurred. "Don't you dare talk to my wife like that," he snarled, his face inches from hers, spittle flying. "She's trying to start a family, Alara. That's a full-time job in itself." He punctuated his twisted defense with a sickening blow. His fist connected with her face again, the sound a wet crunch that seemed to echo in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. Alara stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, collapsing against the counter. Her hand flew to her face, feeling the warmth of fresh blood gushing from her nose. Through the haze of pain and shock, she looked up, her eyes locking onto Chloe's. And in Chloe's eyes, Alara saw not concern, not pity, but a cold, undeniable satisfaction. It was a look that curdled Alara's blood, turning her nausea into a bitter resolve. "Now look what you made me do," Ethan accused, his voice thick with self-pity, shifting the blame onto her for his own brutality. The classic abuser's refrain. Alara slowly pushed herself upright, her hand pressing a clean kitchen towel to her rapidly swelling nose. The pain was still there, a fierce, pulsating agony, but something else had awakened within her. A quiet, steely resolve had replaced the shock and hurt. The tears she might have shed remained unshed, replaced by an icy calm. "You need to leave," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the throbbing in her head. Chloe, emboldened by Ethan's aggression, stepped forward, her perfectly sculpted face a mask of defiance. "We're not going anywhere, Alara, not until you transfer that money." Honey, all of it." Her eyes held a desperate, avaricious gleam. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath. The silence was thick, broken only by the frantic beat of her own heart. She slowly reached for her phone on the counter, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Her fingers, though trembling slightly, found the numbers with ease. "I'm giving you 60 seconds, she said, her voice now dangerously low, "to get out of my house, or I will call the police and you can explain to them why you've assaulted your mother and are refusing to leave her property." The threat, stark and undeniable, hung in the air. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, his rage warring with the primal fear of consequences. Chloe, too, seemed to falter, her smug expression finally cracking. The thought of sirens, flashing lights, and the public humiliation of their greed was evidently more potent than their entitlement. Ethan's face, still red with fury, contorted into a snarl of defeat. He grabbed Chloe's arm, yanking her toward the door. "You haven't heard the last of this, Mom," he spat, his final words echoing in the sudden quiet as the front door slammed shut behind them. Alara stood alone in her kitchen, the silence deafening, punctuated only by the drip of blood from her nose onto the linoleum, a grim tableau of betrayal. The towel in her hand was soaked, a dark stain blossoming across the white fabric. But as she stood there, a strange sense of clarity settled over her. The line had been crossed. Her son, her daughter-in-law, had shown her their true colors. And in that moment, the 62-year-old woman, bruised and bleeding, knew that her life, as she knew it, was irrevocably over. But a new chapter, one she hadn't anticipated, was about to begin. The ice pack pressed against Alara's nose was a cruel comfort, a physical barrier against the throbbing pain that still resonated from Ethan's punch. But the ache in her heart was far deeper, far more insidious. As the cold numbed her skin, her mind drifted, peeling back the years to a time when her son's touch brought only warmth and joy. What had happened to her sweet boy? The boy who once clung to her hand, his eyes wide with wonder as he watched a calf take its first wobbly steps. She remembered young Ethan, a mop of sandy hair always falling into his eyes, chasing grasshoppers in the summer fields. He wasn't naturally inclined to ranch work, not with the gritty passion Arthur possessed, but he tried. He'd helped feed the chickens, his small hands carefully distributing feed, his face alight with pride. He'd learned to saddle a horse, clumsy at first, but determined, eager to impress his dad and make his mom proud. He wasn't a natural rancher, no, but he was a kind, considerate son, full of gentle humor and a quiet thoughtfulness that Alara cherished. His laughter, free and unrestrained, used to echo across the pastures. Where had that laughter gone? The transformation hadn't been sudden, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion, like a river carving away at rock over decades. The real turning point, she realized, had been 8 years ago, when Arthur, her rock, her partner, her beloved husband, collapsed without warning. A massive heart attack, swift and brutal, stole him away at 58. Ethan was 25 then, fresh out of college, brimming with big city dreams. The ranch, already struggling under the weight of market fluctuations and a few bad seasons, suddenly felt heavier than ever, a tangible manifestation of her crushing grief. Ethan, though heartbroken by his father's death, had no desire to take over the ranch. His gaze was fixed on Denver, on the gleaming towers of finance, a world away from dusty fields and demanding livestock. "Mom," he'd explain gently, "this isn't me. I can't do what Dad did. My future is in the city." Overwhelmed by debt, the stacks of unpaid bills growing taller than the feed sacks in the barn, Ilara knew she couldn't burden him. She swallowed her own despair, pasted on a brave smile, and encouraged him to follow his dreams. "Go, son," she'd said, her voice cracking only slightly. "Your father would have wanted you to live your own life." She hid the crushing weight of the ranch's financial woes, the sleepless nights spent staring at ledgers, the fear gnawing at her insides. In her desperation, she'd even secretly reached out to Samuel Thorne, the family lawyer, a man whose wisdom was as deep as the wells on her property, asking about the feasibility of selling off a portion of the land. But after a few days of agonizing thought, of walking the fields Arthur had loved, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. She would handle it alone. For Arthur, for Ethan. Ethan moved to Denver, and for the first few years, he maintained contact. Regular phone calls, sporadic visits during holidays. He'd talk excitedly about his work, his friends, his new life. Ilara would listen, her heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. He was building something for himself, something she and Arthur had always wanted for him. Their bond, though stretched by distance, felt strong and unwavering. Then Chloe entered the picture. Ilara remembered the first time Ethan brought her home for Christmas, about 5 years after Arthur's death. Chloe, a vision in tailored city clothes, stepped out of Ethan's car and surveyed the old ranch house with an expression that Ilara immediately recognized as disdain. Her gaze swept over the worn porch, the weathered wood, the dusty yard, as if she were looking at something beneath her. The air around her seemed to vibrate with an unspoken judgment. Chloe had barely set foot inside before her perfectly manicured hand gestured expansively at the sprawling property. "So, Ilara," she'd begun, her voice bright, almost too sweet, "what's all this land worth, really? I mean, it's quite a lot of acreage. Has anyone ever had it valued?" She'd asked with a casualness that belied the sharp intensity in her eyes, almost immediately pivoting to inheritance plans. "This place is a gold mine, practically. Are there any wills? Trusts? What's the plan for it all?" Her questions were blunt, devoid of any genuine interest in the ranch itself, only its monetary potential. Ilara, surprised by the directness, had straightened her spine. "I'm not selling," she stated firmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a woman who had fought hard for what was hers. "This ranch is Ethan's inheritance. It always has been." She looked at her son, expecting him to back her up, to explain the sentimental value, the history, but Ethan merely shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Chloe, however, wasn't so easily deterred. "Ethan doesn't want to be a rancher, Ilara," she argued, a subtle edge creeping into her tone. "He has a career, a life in Denver. You are holding on to something that's not even useful to your family. It's just sitting there, losing value. Think of what that money could do for us now." Her words, though cloaked in a veneer of concern, felt like a direct assault on Ilara's life's work, on Arthur's memory. The implication that the ranch, her home, her legacy, was not even useful stung deeply. That night, after Ethan and Chloe had gone to bed, the words replayed in Ilara's mind, a discordant symphony of greed and entitlement. For the first time, a seed of genuine fear began to sprout. She picked up the phone and called Samuel Thorne, not about selling, not about her own finances, but about protecting assets. She explained Chloe's pointed questions, her insistent probing, the way Ethan had stayed silent. Samuel, always astute, listened carefully. "Ilara," he'd said slowly, his voice laced with caution, "it sounds like you might need to consider some legal structures. Trust, perhaps, ways to ensure your assets are distributed according to your wishes and not claimed by people with bad intentions." He didn't mention Chloe by name, but the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Ilara, despite Samuel's seasoned advice, found it all a bit excessive then. Bad intentions? She couldn't fully comprehend it. This was her son, her family. She still clung to the notion that family would always look out for one another, that love and loyalty trumped avarice. Yet a growing unease settled deep in her bones, a premonition. Over the next 3 years, that uneasy feeling deepened. Calls from Ethan became less frequent, more perfunctory. Visits dwindled. When they did come, Chloe's questions about the ranch's value, about Alara's financial plans, became more pointed, more demanding. It was a slow, insidious tightening of the noose, leading inexorably to the confrontation in her kitchen, to the bitter taste of blood, and the shocking realization that the sweet boy she remembered was gone, replaced by a stranger driven by a stranger's wife. Alara knew with a certainty that chilled her to the core that trouble was not just coming, it had already arrived. The years following Chloe's first visit became a slow, agonizing erosion of the son Alara knew. It wasn't a sudden fracture, but a systematic wearing away, like desert wind against sandstone. Alara watched helpless, as Chloe meticulously, almost surgically, reshaped Ethan's perceptions, his values, and ultimately, his loyalty. Chloe had a masterful way of sowing discontent. She subtly, then overtly, began to convince Ethan that his childhood, though filled with love and hard work, had been traumatic, not because of any hardship, but because of a perceived lack of wealth. The ranch, in her narrative of Brier, wasn't a legacy of perseverance, but a symbol of their struggle, a place where Ethan had been deprived of the lavish comforts she believed he deserved. She cultivated in him a profound sense of entitlement, painting his family's modest rancher's life as a handicap he had to overcome. Slowly, insidiously, Ethan's conversations with Alara began to change. He started making casual yet pointed comments. "Mom, are you really spending all that money on upkeep for this old place? It's a money pit." Or, Mom, you're getting older. Living all alone out here, it's not really safe, is it?" He suggested with an air of concerned practicality that now, in retrospect, felt chillingly manipulative, that she sell the ranch and move into a senior community where she'd be taken care of. The suggestion, though cloaked in care, was clearly designed to free up the ranch's capital. Alara, sensing the underlying agenda, resisted firmly. "This is my home, Ethan. It's where your father and I built our life. I'm not going anywhere." Her defiance only seemed to intensify Chloe's efforts. Chloe's complaints about their tiny apartment became a constant refrain, a not-so-subtle plea for help, or rather, a demand for Alara's assets. One evening during a particularly strained visit, Alara had accidentally overheard a hushed conversation from the kitchen. She'd been in the pantry reaching for a forgotten jar of preserves. Chloe's voice, sharp and frustrated, cut through the quiet. "She's being deliberately difficult, Ethan. She just doesn't want us to have anything good. She's probably just spiteful." Ethan's response was a low murmur, indistinguishable, but his silence was more damning than any agreement. It was then Alara fully grasped the extent of Chloe's influence. Ethan, her gentle son, was beginning to see her not as his mother, but as an obstacle, a stubborn impediment to the life he now believed he was owed. He was seeing her through Chloe's eyes, filtered through a lens of avarice and resentment. 6 months before the devastating confrontation in her kitchen, Alara made a pivotal decision. The constant pressure, the subtle jabs, the increasing tension during their rare visits, it was all becoming too much. She was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like a financial target. She decided to sell the ranch. She genuinely believed that by converting the land into liquid assets, the source of their contention, the symbol of their greed, would finally be gone. She hoped it would bring peace, ease the tension, allow them to simply be family again. She called Ethan, relaying the news. "I'm putting the ranch on the market, honey." A silence followed, longer than usual, then a sigh of what Alara interpreted as relief. He sounded almost buoyant. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. We were just looking at some places in Cherry Hills. For when we start our family." The words, though seemingly innocent, sent a shiver down Alara's spine. They were already spending her money in their minds. Alara, trying to be both gentle and firm, reiterated her position. "Ethan, honey, remember this money is for my retirement. Your father and I worked our entire lives for this security." Another silence, this one heavier, charged with an unspoken demand. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was laced with a practiced weariness. "Mom, you know how hard things are for us. Chloe's not working right now, and you know how expensive it is to start a family in this economy. We really need a home, a proper place to raise kids. That money would be life-changing for us." He spoke of their struggles with a tone that suggested Alara was somehow responsible for them and that her money was the obvious, natural solution. Alara tried to explain her own needs, her own fears. Ethan, I've spent my whole life working this land, always living paycheck to paycheck, never knowing true financial security. This money represents the chance for me to finally live comfortably, without fear and worry, in my old age. She deserved it, she knew. She had earned it. But Ethan, clearly coached by Chloe, was ready with a counterargument. You don't need much, Mom. You're so frugal. What would you even do with $800,000? The question was posed as if it were illogical for her, a single elderly woman, to possess such a sum. It was a thinly veiled attempt to diminish her needs, to justify their claim to her wealth. Alara, still holding on to the fragile hope of avoiding conflict, of finding a path to harmony, replied vaguely, "We'll figure something out that works for everyone, Ethan, something fair." It was a phrase meant to be conciliatory, to buy herself time. Now, standing in her kitchen, her nose throbbing, the full weight of that mistake crashed down on her. We'll figure something out that works for everyone. Those words had not been a bridge to understanding, but a dangerous open door. They had taken everyone to mean us, and us to mean they had full access to her money, the money she had earned, the money that was meant for her future. She had inadvertently given them false hope, a justification for their escalating demands, leading directly to the violence she had just endured. Her desire for peace had paved the way for war. The ice pack continued its cold work, numbing the physical pain but doing little to quell the storm raging within Alara. As she sat in the quiet aftermath of the assault, the realization hit her with the force of another blow, albeit an emotional one. Ethan and Chloe hadn't come to her house to ask for help or even to negotiate. They had come to claim what they felt was theirs, her money. They had arrived with an expectation, a demand, backed by coercion and ultimately violence. The mask of concern had finally slipped, revealing the stark, ugly truth of their entitlement. Her fingers, still slightly swollen, fumbled in the small, carved wooden box where she kept important papers. Beneath old photos and dried flowers, she found it. Samuel Thorne's business card, worn at the edges, a testament to its age and her long-held, unspoken worry. His name, etched in precise black script, seemed to glow with renewed significance. 3 years ago, he had advised her on protecting assets from people with bad intentions. 3 years ago, she had dismissed it as excessive. Now it felt like prophecy. The time to act on that plan, she knew, had finally arrived. But first, a delicate dance was required, a performance. She picked up her phone, her fingers hesitating only for a second before dialing Ethan's number. She let the phone ring, counting the seconds, giving herself time to compose her voice. When he answered, a slight tremor in his tone, Alara immediately affected a conciliatory, almost weary tone. "Ethan," she began, her voice softer than it had been in months, carefully modulating her pain into resignation. "I've been thinking about what you said, about everything. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am being selfish." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she pushed them out, each one a calculated step in her emerging strategy. A pause. Ethan's voice, when he responded, was laced with caution, a sliver of suspicion. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." He was clearly thrown by her sudden capitulation, by the unexpected change in her demeanor. He likely expected fury, defiance, perhaps even a call to the police. Not this quiet retreat. "I'm fine, honey," Alara replied, infusing her voice with a touch of fragility, a hint of vulnerability. "Just thinking about family and what's really important." She let the words hang, allowing him to interpret them as he wished, as a surrender, a softening. Then she delivered the bait. "Look, I think we need to talk, really talk, about the money." She paused, letting the silence amplify the promise of her next words. "Why don't you and Chloe come over tomorrow evening? Say 7 o'clock? We can sit down and truly figure out how to make everyone happy." On the other end of the line, she heard a distinct intake of breath from Ethan, a suppressed gasp of surprise, and she imagined triumph. Then a faint, high-pitched squeal reached her ears from the background, Chloe's unmistakable, excited reaction. They believed they had won, They truly believed she was folding. "Seriously, Mom?" Ethan's voice was barely contained. "7 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be there." His relief was palpable, laced with a triumphant edge he couldn't quite conceal. "Seriously," Elara confirmed, her voice holding steady. "7 o'clock. We'll figure out how to make everyone happy." She repeated the phrase, knowing full well that everyone would soon have a very different meaning than they anticipated. She hung up the phone, the click echoing in the quiet kitchen. For the first time in what felt like months, a slow, almost dangerous smile spread across Alara's bruised face. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of cold, calculated satisfaction. They thought they had broken her. They thought the violence had brought her to her senses, had forced her hand. But Ethan's punch, brutal and unforgivable, had done the precise opposite. It hadn't knocked sense into her. It had knocked her back to herself, awakening a fierce, protective resolve she hadn't known she still possessed. It had clarified everything. Her gaze drifted to the window, the last streaks of sunset painting the sky in fiery hues. She envisioned Samuel Thorne's office, a quiet, wood-paneled room filled with the scent of old books and serious decisions. It was a place where words held weight, where documents created impermeable boundaries, where intentions were codified into law. Alara knew her meeting with Samuel tomorrow wouldn't be about selling off bits of land or making vague plans. It would be the precise strategic commencement of her countermove. She would walk into that office not as a victim, but as a general preparing for battle. She mentally began to marshal her thoughts, preparing for the intricate legal and intensely emotional battle that lay ahead. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her autonomy, and defining the true meaning of family. Her determination, once dulled by grief and affection, was now sharpened by a dangerous clarity, a steel resolve born of betrayal, a clarity that Ethan and Chloe, in their arrogant certainty of victory, were utterly, blissfully oblivious to. And that, Alara thought, was precisely how she wanted it. If you've been on the edge of your seat with Alara's story, you're in for a treat. The wheels of justice, or perhaps something even more satisfying, are about to turn. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to catch every moment of this unfolding drama. Let's see what Alara does next. The morning air was crisp and cool as Alara stepped out of her old pickup truck, the early autumn chill a sharp contrast to the burning resolve within her. Her nose, a tender tapestry of purple and blue, still throbbed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of the previous day's brutality. She adjusted the collar of her simple cotton blouse, straightening her shoulders before pushing open the heavy glass door to Samuel Thorne's office building. The polished brass plate beside the door read, "Samuel Thorne, Attorney at Law." At exactly 8 o'clock a.m., she walked into the quiet professional sanctuary. Samuel, a man whose silver hair matched the distinguished clarity of his gaze, rose from behind his large mahogany desk. He nodded, his eyes lingering for a moment on her bruised face, but he didn't pry. He was too seasoned for that. He simply gestured to the chair opposite him, his expression one of calm understanding. "Alara," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "it's good to see you, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Without preamble, he reached for a thick, leather-bound folder on a nearby shelf. It bore a neat, embossed label, Jensen Family Trust. He laid it open on the desk, the pages rustling softly as he spread several documents across the polished surface. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the weight of serious decisions. Samuel looked at Alara, his gaze piercing. "Before we proceed, Alara, I need to ask you one last time. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once these documents are executed, there's no going back. The terms will be binding." His words were a final solemn warning, a last chance to retreat from the precipice. Alara's fingers instinctively rose to touch her tender nose, the soft pressure reminding her of the pain, of Ethan's fury, and most vividly, of Chloe's cold, calculated words. "You'll be dead soon anyway. What do you need all that money for?" The memories, sharp and unforgiving, solidified her resolve. She met Samuel's gaze, her own eyes steady. "I'm certain, Samuel, completely certain." He nodded, a slight compression of his lips. "Very well. As we discussed 3 years ago, we established a revocable living trust, specifically designed to protect your assets and ensure your wishes are carried out without interference. It contains what we call a protection clause. He explained how the $850,000 she had just received from the ranch sale would be immediately and irrevocably transferred into this trust. Once it's in the trust, Alara, it's no longer considered your personal property for the purpose of inheritance disputes or easy claims. It's managed by the trust for your benefit, according to its terms, effectively shielding it from any attempts by Ethan or Chloe to lay claim to it now. He continued, his voice taking on a graver tone. Furthermore, the protection clause specifies that any attempt by a named beneficiary, which would include Ethan, to contest this trust legally or to harass you in any way regarding these assets will result in the immediate forfeiture of all inheritance rights from you, not just from this trust, but from any future inheritance you might have intended for them. It was an ironclad deterrent designed to punish avarice and protect her peace. Alara's brow furrowed slightly. What about my other assets, Samuel? My house, my savings, my car? Samuel's expression was grim. They will all be transferred into the trust as well, Alara. Every significant asset you own. The trust will essentially become your financial steward, managing everything for your benefit. This ensures that the protection is comprehensive, leaving nothing vulnerable to their potential claims. She nodded slowly. It was a drastic step, a complete relinquishment of her direct financial control, but the alternative was a lifetime of badgering, of battling, of being seen as a walking ape. She reached for the pen Samuel offered, her hand steady despite the tremors deep inside. With each firm stroke of the pen, as she signed page after page of legalese, Alara felt a peculiar blend of sadness and liberation. Each signature wasn't just a legal formality, it was a small victory, an act of rebellion, a brick laid in the foundation of her new, unassailable future. Before she left, Samuel handed her another document, crisp and official. This is a temporary restraining order, he explained. It's all prepared, ready to be filed with the court within hours if they make any more threats, physical or otherwise. It will ensure your personal safety, Alara. She tucked it into her purse, feeling a surge of calm confidence. By 10 o'clock a.m., Alara was at the bank, standing before the teller at a discreet counter. She watched, her heart a strange mix of apprehension and satisfaction, as her checking account balance, a significant $853,412, plummeted to a mere $3,112. The bulk of her life's earnings, the ranch money, was now safely nestled within the newly activated Jensen Family Trust. Eleanor Vance, her longtime bank manager, whose kind eyes mirrored a fleeting concern, glanced at the numbers. Alara, are you certain about this transfer? It's a very large sum. Alara simply offered a small, reassuring smile. It's exactly where it needs to be, Eleanor. Somewhere safe. She spent the rest of the day in a flurry of purposeful errands, her movements light, almost buoyant. She went to the grocery store, browsed a small bookshop, even stopped for a quiet cup of coffee. Beneath the ordinary surface of her day, an electric anticipation hummed through her veins. Tonight, Ethan and Chloe would arrive, expecting to claim their prize, to carve up her future for their own benefit. Instead, they would learn a hard, unforgettable lesson. They would learn they had not just pushed a woman, but they had pushed the wrong woman. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Alara's kitchen floor as her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Ethan. She watched the screen for a moment, a faint smile playing on her lips, before letting it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, his voice, thick with an almost giddy excitement, filled the quiet room. Hey, Mom, just calling to confirm for tonight. Chloe is absolutely thrilled, already looking at houses in Cherry Hills. We're so excited to finally get this sorted. See you at 7. The sheer audacity of his enthusiasm, less than 24 hours after he had brutalized her, was breathtaking. He acted as if yesterday's violence was merely a prelude to a transaction, already forgotten in the anticipation of wealth. Alara waited a beat before calling him back, her voice carefully neutral. Ethan, honey, just wanted to say, don't bother bringing any documents or anything tonight. Just bring yourselves. She hung up before he could question it, a subtle warning in her words, though she knew they would be too blinded by greed to heed it. At precisely 7 o'clock p.m., a sleek, dark sedan pulled into her driveway. Alara watched from her living room window as Ethan emerged, followed by Chloe, who was dressed in an expensive-looking silk blouse and tailored trousers, as if attending a celebratory event rather than a family discussion. Her perfectly styled hair and impeccably applied makeup spoke volumes of her expectations for the evening. They looked triumphant, already assuming victory. Alara allowed them to knock twice, a small delay to assert her quiet control, before finally opening the door. Ethan, attempting a facade of concerned civility, leaned in for a hug. Alara sidestepped him smoothly, her movements economical, betraying nothing. The ghost of yesterday's violence still lingered, making physical contact impossible. "Mom, your nose," Ethan began, his voice laced with a performative concern that barely masked his impatience. He glanced at her bruised face with a quick, dismissive flick of his eyes, clearly eager to move past the unpleasantness to the real matter at hand. Chloe, meanwhile, had already swept past him, her gaze calculating as she took in the familiar, yet suddenly charged atmosphere of Alara's living room. She settled into one of the armchairs, her posture rigid with anticipation. Chloe, always the more direct of the two, wasted no time. Her smile, though practiced, didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Alara," she began, her tone laced with a forced sweetness that verged on bitter. "Have you reconsidered our conversation yesterday? About the ranch money, of course." She used mom in a way that sounded less like endearment and more like a term of proprietorship. Alara met her gaze, a serene calm settling over her. "I have, Chloe," she confirmed, her voice soft, almost regretful. "I've been thinking a lot about it, and you're right, family should take care of each other." She let the words hang in the air, watching as their faces brightened, leaning in, their greed practically vibrating in the room. They believed this was it, the moment of her surrender. Then Alara dropped the bombshell, her voice remaining perfectly level, cutting through the expectant silence like a surgical knife. "Which is why I've taken steps to make sure my money is properly protected. For me." Confusion flickered across Ethan's face, quickly morphing into a nervous, almost dismissive laugh. "Protected? What are you talking about, Mom? Protected from what?" He tried to sound lighthearted, as if she were making a joke. Chloe, however, was not amused. Her eyes narrowed, the smile vanishing entirely. "Protected from what, Alara?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a sudden, growing unease. The casual facade had crumbled. Alara met her gaze unflinchingly. "From people who might try to take advantage of an old woman," she calmly replied, her gaze holding steady, refusing to break. The implication hung heavy in the air, suffocating their false sense of security. Without another word, Alara reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a single sheet of paper, her latest bank statement. She handed it to Ethan. He took it, his brow furrowed, scanning the numbers. His eyes widened, blinking once, twice, in utter disbelief. The balance stared back at him. $3,412. Chloe, seeing his stunned reaction, snatched the statement from his hand. Her eyes darted across the page, her face paling rapidly, the expensive makeup suddenly stark against her drained complexion. "Where is it, Alara?" she shrieked, her carefully composed voice shattering into a desperate, raw edge. "What did you do with our money?" The possessiveness in her voice was absolute, revealing the depths of her entitlement. Alara leaned back slightly, a quiet power emanating from her. "Your money?" she retorted, her voice imbued with a quiet, dangerous sarcasm. "I'm sorry, I must have missed the part where you worked 40 years of hard labor to earn it, Chloe." Ethan, finally roused from his stupor, stood abruptly, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "Mom, this isn't funny," he roared, his voice echoing the fury that had been unleashed the day before. "Where did you put the money? Tell us now." Alara rose slowly, meeting his furious gaze with a cold, unwavering intensity. "Somewhere you can't get it, Ethan," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, each word a hammer blow. "Somewhere safe, protected. Protected from people who think they can break their mother's nose and then demand her life savings." The words hung in the air, a stark, brutal truth that brought the room to a horrified, complete silence. The silence that descended upon Alara's living room was thick, suffocating, punctuated only by the rapid, shallow breathing of Ethan and Chloe. The truth had finally landed, a crushing blow to their avarice, and Alara watched, unblinking, as the realization solidified in their eyes. Their faces, once flushed with triumphant expectation, were now contorted with a mixture of shock, confusion, and raw, unadulterated rage. Chloe, her voice shaking with a fury barely contained, was the first to break the stillness. "You can't do this, Alara. You just can't. That money belongs to this family. It's our inheritance." She was practically spitting the words, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Alara, remaining calm amidst the storm, simply corrected her. "It does belong to this family, Chloe. It belongs to me, and I am family." Her voice was clear, firm, leaving no room for argument. Ethan, meanwhile, began to pace like a caged animal, running a hand through his hair, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route, a loophole. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "There must be a way to reverse this. It's just a transfer, right? You can undo it." He looked at her, his expression a frantic blend of hope and fear. "I could," Alara repeated, her voice soft but unyielding. "But I won't." The finality in her tone was absolute. Chloe, her eyes blazing, demanded, "Why are you doing this to us, Alara? To your son? To your daughter-in-law? We're family." The irony of her words, given her behavior, was almost comical. Alara slowly pushed herself to her feet, a subtle shift in her posture radiating strength and unwavering resolve. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly in command, not just of the situation, but of herself. Her gaze, cool and steady, swept over Chloe, then to Ethan. "Why am I doing this?" she repeated, a hint of bitterness finally creeping into her voice. "Chloe, you told me I'd be dead soon anyway, and asked what I needed all that money for. You called me deliberately difficult for not handing over my life savings." Her eyes then settled on Ethan. "And Ethan, you broke your mother's nose. Twice. For money." Ethan flinched, his anger momentarily replaced by a flicker of shame. "Mom, I was just frustrated," he mumbled, offering a quick, hollow apology. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You just wouldn't listen." "Yes, you did, Ethan," Alara countered, her voice unwavering. "You meant every bit of it. You meant to intimidate me, to hurt me, to force me into submission so you could take what you felt entitled to." The raw truth of her words hung in the air, undeniable. Chloe's mask completely evaporated, her face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. "You bitter old woman," she shrieked, her voice hoarse with fury. "You're preventing us from having a real future, from giving your own grandchild a proper home. You're just spiteful." Alara simply raised an eyebrow. "Then I suggest you both go out and earn your own money for your real future, Chloe, just like Arthur and I did." Ethan, recovering his bluster, stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We'll fight this, Mom. We'll take legal action. You can't just hide our inheritance away in some secret account." Alara offered a small, knowing smile. She reached into her pocket once more, pulling out Samuel Thorne's business card, crisp and official. She held it out to Ethan. "You're welcome to try, Ethan. My lawyer, Samuel Thorne, is very good at what he does. I'm sure he'd be delighted to explain the terms of the Jensen family trust to you." Chloe snatched the card, tearing it in half with a furious rip. "You'll regret this, Alara. You mark my words. When you're all alone and need us, remember that you chose money over family." It was her final hateful jab, a last desperate attempt to inflict emotional pain. Alara's gaze, though, remained unbroken. "I chose protecting myself," she corrected, her voice now calm, infused with a quiet dignity, "over enabling people who wanted to hurt me and take advantage of me. There's a very big difference, Chloe." With that, Ethan grabbed Chloe's arm, his face a mottled mix of rage and despair. He knew implicitly that the battle was lost. They stormed out of the house, the front door slamming shut with a violent shudder that echoed the chaos they left behind. Alara stood for a moment in the sudden, profound quiet of her living room. The silence, after their departure, was not empty, but filled with a deep, almost palpable sense of peace. She walked to the front door, methodically checking the lock, then the deadbolt. Secure. For the first time in years, her house truly felt like her sanctuary again. The bruised tenderness on her nose was still there, but the ache in her heart had begun to subside, replaced by a profound, satisfying calm. The next morning, the peaceful silence of her home was shattered by the insistent buzzing of her phone. It was still early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, but her voicemail box was already brimming. Message after desperate message from Ethan and Chloe, their voices raw with panic, disbelief, and a fresh wave of pleas and threats. In one of Chloe's tearful voicemails, amidst the accusations and promises of legal retribution, came a new, desperate revelation. "And how could you do this now, Alara? To your own grandchild. I'm pregnant. We need that money more than ever." Alara listened, her expression unreadable. So that was it. That explained the sudden, intensified urgency, the heightened sense of entitlement, the almost crazed desperation. A grandchild. The news, rather than softening her resolve, solidified it. It was a new life, yes, but it didn't change the nature of the people who would bring it into the world. It only emphasized the importance of her decision. The morning after the unveiling, Alara deleted the cascade of desperate voicemails from Ethan and Chloe without listening to a single one in full, certainly without returning any calls. Her phone, no longer a source of connection but a conduit for their demands, felt alien in her hand. A short while later, Samuel Thorne's name flashed across the screen. This call, she knew, would be different. "Alara," Samuel's calm voice greeted her. "Just wanted to let you know that 3 different law firms have already called my office this morning, inquiring about the Jensen Family Trust. They're certainly wasting no time." There was a note of weary amusement in his tone. "I expected as much," Alara replied, her voice steady. "They found out about the trust and about the account balance, and they're furious." Samuel chuckled softly. "They are, but rest assured, Alara, the trust is completely protected. Bulletproof as we designed it, I've already faxed copies of the trust documents and the related agreements to all 3 firms, as well as the medical photos you provided from your hospital visit yesterday. Those should certainly give them pause." "Oh, I forgot to tell you," Alara added, a slight edge to her voice. "Chloe is pregnant, 3 months apparently. They left a voicemail about it." A pause on Samuel's end. "Well, that certainly explains some of the heightened desperation," he noted. "Legally, it changes nothing about the trust or their claims. Morally, it might complicate things for them, trying to argue their case to a judge while you have photos of a broken nose. Their problems are not my responsibility," Alara asserted, the words firm and clear. "Indeed," Samuel agreed. "Just be careful, Alara. People do desperate things when they feel cornered, especially with a baby on the way." His words were a warning, a professional caution that resonated deeply. Heeding Samuel's advice, Alara spent the morning systematically securing her home. She drove to the hardware store and bought new heavy-duty locks for every door and window. After installing them herself, her bruised nose still aching, she drove to the local police station. There she filed a formal police report with Officer Kamani, detailing Ethan's physical assault from 2 days prior. She handed over the medical photographs of her injuries, ensuring that the incident was properly documented as elder abuse. The process was clinical, emotionally draining, but necessary. Every action she took now was about protection, about setting an unbreachable boundary. Upon returning home, her heart sank slightly. Slumped on her porch steps, his head in his hands, was Ethan. He looked utterly distraught, his hair disheveled, his shoulders slumped. Seeing him like this, a part of her old self, the mother who loved him unconditionally, but the new Alara, the one forged in betrayal, remained resolute. "Ethan," she said, her voice firm as she approached, "you need to leave." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Mom, please," he pleaded, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine remorse. "Just 5 minutes, please." Alara hesitated, then sighed. 5 minutes, she conceded, stepping past him to unlock her front door, careful to keep her back to him as she turned the new deadbolt. He stood, his voice raw. "Mom, I am so sorry about hitting you. I don't know what came over me. I was just so angry, so frustrated." It was wrong, so wrong. I never meant to hurt you. Truly. His eyes, normally cold and demanding, seemed genuinely contrite. Alara looked at him, searching for the truth. She saw a flicker of the boy she remembered, the remorse in his eyes seeming real, at least in that moment. I accept your apology, Ethan, she said, her voice softer now, but still resolute. But you still need to leave. Wait, Mom, please, he interjected, his voice rising in panic. Chloe is 3 months pregnant. We desperately need a down payment for a house. This isn't just about us anymore, it's about your grandchild. Just $50,000, Mom, please. Just enough to get us started. I'll pay you back, I promise. His desperation was palpable, laced with a new urgency. The money is in a trust, Ethan, Alara explained, her voice flat. It's inaccessible to me, and it's certainly inaccessible to you. You and Chloe are both capable adults. Chloe can get a bomb. You can both work and save for your own house, just like every other couple starting a family. Ethan's face, which had been pale with despair, suddenly flushed a furious red. You're punishing your own grandchild, Mom. You're letting your spite ruin their future. No, Ethan, Alara countered, her voice calm and firm. I am protecting myself and my assets from people who think they can demand my life's work. I am protecting myself from people who would abuse me for money. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. You built your entire life, your plans with Chloe, around inheriting from me, didn't you? Before I was even dead. He averted his eyes, a tacit admission. It's what families do, Mom, he mumbled weakly. Not this family, not anymore, Alara said, shaking her head. Not when inheritance means breaking my nose and demanding every penny I have. How do you propose to pay me back anyway? With money you don't have, from a life you haven't built. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. This isn't over, Mom, he snarled, a familiar venom creeping back into his voice. He turned abruptly and stormed off the porch, leaving Alara alone once more. As soon as he was gone, Alara called Samuel Thorne. She relayed the new details, including Chloe's pregnancy and Ethan's renewed threats. They're still pushing, Samuel. They won't give up. As I said, Alara, desperate people, Samuel reiterated calmly. But the trust is bulletproof. They won't get a cent that way. Any further action from them, any legal challenges to the trust, will only trigger the forfeiture clause. Minutes after hanging up with Samuel, Alara's phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. She answered. Hello? Ms. Jensen, my name is Miss Dubois. I'm an attorney representing Ethan and Chloe Jensen. The voice was crisp, professional, but held an underlying tone of challenge. I'm calling about the Jensen Family Trust. My clients claim this trust was established under duress, perhaps due to undue influence. Alara smiled grimly. Under duress, Ms. Dubois? I assure you it was established with a very clear mind. However, I can confirm there was indeed duress involved.